Well, I said this in the earlier service. I hope preaching is like riding a bicycle. I hadn't forgotten how, and it'll be natural for me as we get going. But so thankful for Dr. Jimmy Stewart and Alex Faust and Chris Mixon and a double dose of Daniel Wagner, who handled things over the last several weeks. And it's so good to be back with you. This is Vision Sunday. Our church's frame, the North Star to which we move and operate, is Galatians 5, 6b. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. And what I want to do today, I'm going to put up a few big words in massive font on our new screen, and these three words that we'll roll them out as I preach. I hope you remember them, and I want it to be what we talk about in the future. And this, listen, just that we want to be a Jesus church. That's our ultimate hope. Here's what I want to say about today. The purpose, my hope for Vision Sunday is this, right from the outset here. My hope for Vision Sunday is that we would be moved by what could be and then motivated that it should be. And if I was a good politician, I would say something about being unburdened by what has been or something like that. But moved by what could be and then motivated that it should be. That we would be fueled as we hear this today, this message about Jesus, that we would say it could be, but it should be. And in my hope, look, I'm just putting my cards on the table right up front. No trickeration happening here. I hope you want to be invested. My hope is that whatever's next for you, you'll do that. Because I don't want to be alone here. I'm going to share something kind of meaningful, very meaningful and somewhat heavy today. And I hope that you're saying, hey, this is what I want to be a part of because we're preaching Jesus. Here's the first massive word on Vision Sunday. It's the word incarnation. The word incarnation. When I was 23 years old and 24, I'd finished Mississippi State University and moved to Tallahassee, Florida. I worked with Crew at Florida State University, and we had a global partnership, where we went to Belgrade, Yugoslavia. It used to be called Yugoslavia. It's in the nation of Serbia now and next to Croatia. But a beautiful place, wonderful people. They loved Americans. We were treated like celebrities, but it was a Marxist atheistic culture. And we had to be covert in what we were doing. We were helping university students find Jesus, and we were helping some church leaders there plant a couple of churches in this great city. Well, because of danger, the government officials and such, and we would need to disperse, and we went to a village. There was a place we would go, and we got to know some of the villagers in kind of a retreat setting. And one night, I'm with my roommate, John DeJager, and a couple others next door, and we hear this thunderous, urgent knock on the door. You couldn't knock on a door more urgently than what we heard that night. We were awoken from our slumber, and I was the first to answer the door, and it was a young man and a young woman who was great with child. She was very pregnant, and her water had broken. And they asked us for a ride into the hospital, which was about 30 minutes away. And John said he was sick. I think he was lying. And so I drive a motor scooter. I'm on a motor scooter. She's behind me, and he's behind her. And we're riding on this little motor scooter to the hospital. She's clawing me, and he's saying, go faster, go faster, go faster. Her belly's pressed up against me. I'm as close to the gas tank as you can be. I'm riding it just like this, and I'm like, Christians shouldn't be touching this way. This is so not appropriate. I'm sure in the Crew manual it said that I was committing some type of sin in this belly, but I'm like, it's not a belly, it's a baby. A baby's pushing me. The baby's like, go, go, go. But the husband's saying she's clawing me, and the husband's like, go faster, go faster, go faster. And she just says abruptly, stop, stop. And I'm like, no, not stop. We got to go. There's only one, got to go to a hospital. I'm looking at a doctor, looking at a nurse, got to have a hospital. And she says stop, but then I learned in short order that we stopped at plan B, and a woman comes out, and she's just cool as can be, and some type of midwife or something, and she comes out, and she gives birth to this baby right there within a matter of minutes. I think it was probably 20 minutes later, this baby was born. Can you believe a few hours later, we driving back to their house? And every time I think of the incarnation, every time I think about Jesus being born, when we come in here and sing songs on Christmas Eve, and we're preaching a sermon series about a baby being born in Bethlehem so long ago, I, of course, think about that night. I think about being woken up. I think about her claws. I think about her baby pushing me in my back. I think about stopping. I think about the delivery. And I wasn't there, of course, but I think about the birth of Jesus. Similarly, a young dad and a young mom, no doctors, no nurses, but a baby is born. Pain and crying out, darkness, poverty. Jesus came, and Jesus was born. A man's life, who was so radically changed, would write to the church in the Greek world at the time. And he would say this in Colossians 1:15. He would say that he, Jesus, the incarnate God, he's the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation. This is our Savior. So when we look at Jesus and we think of the incarnation, the first massive word I'm giving us on Vision Sunday, we see that Jesus is relational. We see that he's relational. Jesus took upon the traits of humanity. Now, to help you understand this and me understand this, let me ask you to use your imagination. Let's say you kick it back a few weeks and you're at someone's 4th of July party and they have games that you're playing, not just, American stuff, but just games and hot dogs and homemade ice cream and all that stuff. They're like, hey, somebody says, we're going to do a 3-legged race. Y'all ever played a 3-legged race? Y'all know how that works? Someone, you're paired up with somebody, you have a partner, and say your left leg is tied with someone's right leg, and you're racing the people on either side of you. It's a 3-legged race. Well, let's say, in using your imagination, you're pretending with me. Let's say that you get paired up with Noah Lyles, Olympic sprinter. Noah Lyles without COVID, by the way. He doesn't have COVID, and Noah Lyles says, hey, I want you to be my partner. And you're thinking, you got a couple thoughts. Number one, this is good because he is fast. And then you think, this may not be good because I am slow. But you've taken on a race with Noah Lyles. You're connected to him. Listen, Noah Lyles would not lose any of his Olympic standing by being tied to your leg. And when Jesus came, just taking a stab here, when Jesus came, he didn't lose any of his divinity, but there was an addition of humanity. And when Jesus came, he related. I wasn't in Bethlehem when he was born. I was there when a baby was born in the middle of the night to an impoverished young couple that was screaming out without a doctor or without a nurse. I wasn't there that night, but I just think of this baby born in Bethlehem would grow up, and he would give sight to the blind and hearing to the deaf, and he would raise dead people to truly, truly walk in newness of life. He would weep when he found out his best friend was dead. He would grow frustrated when he found out women were being abused by men. He grew angry when religious leaders would judge the irreligious people on the outside. The incarnate God, Jesus, is relational. Jesus is relational. When we cast vision for our church, when we talk about what type of people we want to be formed into, I want us to look today at the incarnation and the reality that Jesus is relational, that he took on the addition of humanity to relate to us. I've got a buddy, he got the approval of his wife and his pastor. He is in our church, and he goes to a tavern every other night to have dinner. He does this so that he's very well aware that in this tavern that the people who wander in are struggling very greatly. And he's there to represent Jesus because Jesus is God incarnate, the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, and he wants to be there to connect to people. I know another person, a woman in our church. She helps serve people who are uninsured or underinsured, and she wants to make sure that they have the proper medicine and health care that they need for their future and their survival. We love and we're called to be relational as Jesus is. Galatians 6:2 put it this way, that we are to bear one another's burdens. And as we bear one another's burdens, what do? We so fulfill the law of Christ. We don't worry about the outcome. We leave that to God. So many of us are like, hey, as a church, I'm going to love if it's convenient. I'm going to invest myself if I get the fruit. Through the years, I've been blown away by you, by some people in our church, like some of you who at the beginning saw a friend of mine show up. He knew me from a previous life, and he said, Robert, when you start the church I'm in, and I didn't know him really that well, and I thought, oh, great, just a human. Got one. Vertebrae, central nervous system. I'll use him. He'll be a leader. He'll be an elder. And I got to know him, and I realized he struggled with some demons. And drugs and alcohol were getting the better of him. I'll never forget when he walked into our church next door where we started there, and he walked in, and you embraced him and loved him. You know, when a pastor's vulnerable, when people come into church, you're just glad they're there. You hope they can give money, and you want them to be a leader and all those, human things. And I learned quickly that he wouldn't be able to give much to us. But I watched you give so much to him. I watched you be with him and hear his story and weep with him. I watched you take him on and include him in circles of love and care. I watched people put a hand on his shoulder and said, hey, we believe in you. He was estranged from his only son. He was divorced a couple of times over. We'd find him in awkward, peculiar positions and situations, smelling like alcohol, not telling us the truth sometimes. I continue to watch you love him. And I remember the Sunday that I was here, and I used to sit there, and now we sit there because Lauren put a camera there. But I used to sit there, and I remember when he walked in, I know there's going to be a few that will remember this. It was one of the most pitiful things I've ever seen in church or life. 61-year-old man, alcohol was getting the best of him, was quite literally rotting his brain. He walked into our church. Second song, it was very disruptive. He came in this door. We don't like it when y'all do that. He came in this door, and I remember thinking, oh, Lord, where are the ushers? How's this going to go? Don't be a distraction. God help him. And he had a child's bike. He just was walking the bike in. His eyes were glossed over. Saliva was coming out. I think he sort of knew where he was, and he thought this is the only place this is my last resort. They've loved me before. Maybe they'll love me now. And I watched as a couple of ushers did what they were instructed to do. It's a fine line when you're ushering in church because you want to love as Jesus loved and include everybody, showing no partiality, but we didn't want him to distract or to the service or take away from the Spirit of God. And they took this man out in the commons and loved on him. And one of you loved him to the very end. It wasn't long after that. One of you picked him up off a sidewalk, didn't want him to die there, made sure he found his way to hospice care. I wish the story didn't end like that. But I love to see us love people and love people so well. Jesus is relational. He bears the burdens of other people. I want to show you a photo of a man named Robbie Edmond. Robbie Edmond, I would love for you to read more of him later. He was a sergeant in World War II. He led the 106th Infantry Division. He had 1,292 men in his care, in his troops. They were captured by the German soldiers in the Battle of the Bulge. Japan had some, Germany had some, and the Germans, under gunpoint, took these Americans, and they were taking them, marching them to a POW camp, miles and miles away on foot. And Robbie Edmonds told his troops, he was trying to communicate all the way down the line, all the way down the ranks to make sure every soldier heard this without the Germans being aware. But he wanted them to he told them, he commanded them to take their dog tags off. You see, dog tags, even now, I think, in some of our branches of military, certainly back then, it had the men's religious affiliation. So he tells them to take their dog tags and throw it into the woods because he knew, it was a good call, because he knew that the Germans would kill the Jewish people first. So they were lined up and they were stripped naked. The German soldiers stripped the American men naked. And he held the lead German soldier held the gun to Robbie Edmonds' head, clicked the gun, ready for shooting. And he said, bring the Jewish men out first. And Robbie Edmonds said, today, everybody is Jewish. Every man is Jewish. And if you have to kill somebody, you got to kill everybody, starting with me. The incarnation points us to Jesus. And Jesus is relational. And Jesus took one for us. And Jesus stands in the way of death. You see, there's the incarnation teaching us, instructing us that Jesus is relational. But the incarnation leads to the crucifixion, which shows us, the crucifixion, our second massive word on Vision Sunday, shows us that Jesus is responsive. Jesus is responsive. He cares about people. I wasn't there when Jesus was born. I witnessed a baby being born and late at night to an impoverished couple. I wasn't there when Jesus was born. I wasn't there when Jesus died. I wasn't there when he was crucified. But I can't help but think, why? And how? How can you be a religious leader and you claim that you speak for God and then you turn around and spit on him? He was crowned with the King of the Jews. It was mockery. It wasn't to elevate him. It was to deride him, to accuse him of being a false leader, of being a fraud. They put this on him as a public spectacle. They flogged him. If you have a squeamish stomach, don't read much about flogging. They flogged him, I'll say it, to expose his spinal column. They boarded him up on a wooden cross with nails, his hands and his feet, and mocked him openly in front of others. The religious people did this. Why did they kill Jesus? Was it because he loved children? Was it because he helped women who were oppressed? Was it because he cared for the prostitutes and the lepers, the people that were to be banished from society, the prisoners, those who were forgotten? Was he killed for those reasons? One more time, the people, the religious people. Beware of religion. Beware of religious leaders who claim to speak in the name of God. They were the very people who spat upon him. Jesus, the crucifixion shows us that he's responsive. The Roman government thought, if we kill him, we end it. If we kill him, it's over. Y'all know about this living thing on planet Earth. This is a dandelion. And you probably know this if you've ever snuffed one out. It just seems so easy. You just go, and it's over, right? Wrong. The average dandelion has 50 to 150 seeds. And when you go, over, you know what happens? It replenishes and it multiplies. And the Roman government thought if we kill him, it is over. And one of the most compelling and fascinating things about Christianity, I know we live in a modern world and we think, well, this preacher scandal and this church over here and this bad thing and this, if you spend a lot of time on social media and da-da-da-da-da, and it's true and bad and horrible and all that stuff. But listen, the movement of Jesus is like no other. And the Roman government had every tool at their disposal to squash it out. But the dandelion effect, that it would replenish and it would multiply. And that's what happened with the gospel of Jesus Christ. The crucifixion demonstrates that to us. There is a reality that we all know. There's a lot of fact and fiction when it comes to the Titanic. But this great ship, the date was April 15th, 1912, and it sailed the North Atlantic Ocean. We know that 1,500 people would lose their lives when this ship hit an iceberg. What you may not know is that there were a couple of other ships. There was flares sent out. There was SOS signal. And there were two ships in the vicinity. One was called the Californian. The Californian, it heard, but it didn't respond. History has competing stories of what happened. The pilot, the captain of that ship was asleep. It had run aground, or it selfishly went on to its own destination. But what we know, that the signal came and the Californian went on. But there was another one, the Carpathian. The Carpathian was a little bit closer. It heard the distress signal. It saw, or heard the SOS and saw the flare, the distressed flare. And it made its way. It struck up the other couple of engines, the extra engines, and it made its way to the Titanic. And even though 1,500 people would lose their lives in that frigid water, thanks to this Carpathian ship, 705 people were rescued. Responsiveness, we would say in the story of the Titanic, is a big deal. History tells us that there's a way to respond and a way not to respond. And when we respond well, when we value life, and when we salvage people from the throes of death, when we go toward need, when we're being properly responsive, we are being what Jesus wants us to be as the church. We're working on our back parking lot. Thank you for your patience. It's been hard to work this week looking at all the vehicles out back who've been working on our parking lot. And I know they were ready to stripe it. They did it really, really late on Friday night and Saturday yesterday to make sure that you guys didn't pull in and it was a Donnybrook and anarchy out there where you were running into each other. We don't trust y'all in the parking lot where y'all were like, having angry altercations. So we're like, you got to get the stripes down. But I was looking out my window. I noticed that they left a lot of machinery, but somebody left it looked like a ramp. It looked like a bike ramp. And lo and behold, there were some guys who were wanting to ride bikes, BMX bikes, in our back parking lot, which I thought that's kind of fun. And those guys, you ever know, here's a picture, not of them literally, but just kind of showing you BMX guys. It's a cult, man. Y'all know that Cheney was in the first service, I believe, and he's teaching his sons to be BMXers. And I never was a BMXer, but I'm like, man, this is cool. And they have their language of their own. And I had to be the guy going, hey, man, love you guys, church at 9:30 and 11, but we got to strike the lot. So I kind of had to run them off, but I was listening to them. We had some fun stories, and I learned some of their language. It was like a different language, but they referred to somebody who pulled out first as a poser. And a poser, I learned from these guys, is someone who's got the bike, but the bike's not missing any paint. And there's no elbow scrapes or broken bones or anything like that. They're just a poser. They got the equipment, but they don't use the equipment the right way. They don't take any risk. They don't ride by faith. And I ask you today on Vision Sunday, what's the difference between a poser church and a non-poser church? I submit to you that it's how we respond to those around us. It's our response to a world in need. When our church was brand new, I keep pointing over here because that's where it was, Dooling Hall. There was a family that came for a season, and they had a young adult son who had special needs. It was severe, if I can say that respectfully, but beautiful soul. He ministered to me in just incredible ways. But they told me that he wasn't comfortable coming into church unless I talked to him. I'm like, I can do that. They're like, well, you need to do it every Sunday. I'm like, okay, can't say no. And so I was waiting in the hallway, and here's how it would play out. He would come, and he would kind of come toward me fast sometimes running. And his first words always were, every Sunday was, you look nice today. And I would say, you look nice today too. And he would say, you're my preacher. And I would say, you're my friend. And he would say, I love you. And I would say, I love you too. And one Sunday he didn't show, and service was starting, and I remember thinking, oh no, something has happened. And I think over there on vacation, so I run to the restroom, and we've already getting into too much information, but I just need to tell you all this. So I go to the restroom, and I'm just standing there. Another guy's next to me. We're facing the same wall, doing what you do. And door opens, and I hear this voice, and he goes, you look nice today. And I'm like, you're just vulnerable. Men are vulnerable in there. There's certain places. You look nice today. I love you. And he hugs me. He comes up and he hugs me from behind, violating every rule in the man book. What he reminded me, and I remember a leader would say to me, he meant well, but he said, is this okay? Is this a distraction? I remember thinking, nothing prepares my heart. I miss him. Nothing prepares my heart to preach like him. And what he reminded me, his legacy in my own life, is that there's an order and sequence to love. And y'all remember we did a series called Love is a Battlefield, 1 John, and we said what John said, that we love because he first loved us. And if you're a pastor, if you're a counselor, therapist, teacher, coach, parent, you probably know this because you see it. They come to see you. We don't have the capacity to love if we're not receiving love. And here's the order that God gives us. He initiates, and we reciprocate. He loves us, and we love others, and we respond. The third big word I want to give you, the incarnation leads to the crucifixion, but thank God the crucifixion, it leads to the resurrection. I wasn't there when Jesus was born. I wasn't there when he was crucified. I wasn't there when he comes out of the tomb, but just imagine with me, if you will. Imagine being Peter and John, you're running toward the tomb. The adrenaline, can you feel the adrenaline rush rushing to the tomb? And isn't that great? We struggle. It's a tension that we hold. The Bible is God's word, divine divinely inspired, but there's also human authorship. And y'all know Peter and John, one of them includes in their writings that I beat him to the tomb. Y'all know that? That totally man, right? Women wouldn't do that if they were writing parts of the Bible. They wouldn't include that, but he's like, yeah, I outran him to the tomb. Could you imagine the adrenaline rush? Could you imagine being Thomas? I bet you can. I bet we all could be Thomas at least for a moment. Some of you are plagued with it, where you can't believe, I got to see, I got to touch, I got to taste, I got to feel. The doubts that he had. He wanted to worship, but he had to see if they're real. Could you imagine being Mary after the resurrection? Could you imagine being Mary and you sit at his feet and you're relieved, but it's more than relief, it's like reverence. You see, the resurrection, just as these other big words on the screen teach us, the incarnation teaches us that Jesus is relational, the crucifixion teaches us that Jesus is responsive, the resurrection teaches us that Jesus is relentless. Jesus is relentless. Imagine, keep playing in your imagination and imagine, pretend that you are a Roman soldier, not just any Roman soldier, but you're one of the Roman soldiers who were told by your leader to guard the tomb. So you do that. You do what you're told. Let me tell you, you do what you're told. When you're a Roman soldier, you do what they tell you. The stakes are high. The punishment is swift and severe. You do what you're told. They set up camp and they guard the tomb. A couple of days later, on a foggy Sunday morning, they look over. I'm just using my imagination here a little bit, but there's Jesus. And Jesus walks out and he goes, hey, fellas, it's going to be a good day. This is the day the Lord has made. Good day for Jesus. Bad day for you. What do? You run to Pilate's house. You flee on foot. You go to Governor Pilate's house, and you're at his house, and you knock on the door. You got to get past some people. You got some men. You get past. You knock on the door. He's in his bathrobe because it's early. He's like, "What are you doing? Why are you knocking on my door?" And like, "Hey, that man that we killed, he's alive." And not only is he alive, like he's talking to people, like they're confirming his story. He's already talked to 500 people. The message of Jesus is a relentless message. A very, very relentless message. It's like the dandelion. It multiplies. They thought they could get him. But Jesus, he's relentless. Here's a photo of a man you probably won't recognize. I know you won't. This is William Whitehead, and he's known to be the one he's a physicist, and that's why I don't know him, because he's a physicist. But he's a physicist, and he postulated the theory of, well, more than a theory, he talked about the domino effect. And we use it metaphorically, but the domino effect for him was you take a domino, and this gets in the realm of physics, of course, and even math, but you take a domino, and he said you take a domino that's a couple of inches, and you push it over, and it can take out a domino that's 1.5 times its size. So this 2-inch domino takes out a 3.5, 3.5 takes out a 5, on and on and on. But look at how this plays out, the domino effect in terms of power and energy. You keep going on the 18th domino, you can knock over this. You don't know what this is? The Leaning Tower of Pisa. By the 23rd domino, you're knocking over this, the Eiffel Tower. Of course, you do this after the Olympics. And then you get on the 29th domino, you're knocking over the Empire State Building. You go outside the realms, the domino effect, outside the realm of physics into math. Here's what you're looking at. Take, if you will, the linear progression. Linear progression is this: 2 + 2 = 4. But the geometric progression is 2 times 2 = 4. Same numbers, similar outcome, right? Not at all. If you take a step, a linear step, you probably moved, average person, a couple or a few feet. If you take 30 steps, you've moved 90-something feet. If you take linear steps, but if you take geometric steps, and you take 30 geometric steps, you've gone around the globe some 20-something times. On Resurrection Sunday, when Jesus took a step out of the tomb, he took geometric step in size, in scope, in scale, and in significance. And he invites us into this resurrection life that we could be relentless as we follow who Jesus is. Relentless as we learn from him. And so, with these 3 words, the incarnation, the crucifixion, and the resurrection, Jesus is relational, Jesus is responsive, and Jesus is relentless. I want to give you one big idea this morning in light of all this. The church is Jesus on earth. Despite its flaws, despite its imperfections, the church is Jesus on earth. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. And we are to pattern ourselves after him. On Vision Sunday, I want you to hear from me publicly and personally. We want to be a Jesus church. And if Jesus said it, we want to say it. If Jesus did it, we want to risk it and attempt it ourselves. I believe something happening good, and I believe we're on the cusp of something really good if we can knit our hearts together and follow hard after him. One of the things I love seeing is for the first time in the life of our staff, strange statement to make, and it's a bit of speculation, but I don't see our staff reading the latest Christian books, trying to pattern ourselves after fads or trends. I see us wanting to follow Jesus. And if he said it, we want to say it. If he did it, we want to attempt it. And that's the kind of church that I'm calling us to be today, that we would make it about Jesus. And to follow Jesus, I'm turning my back on you only for a minute, but to follow Jesus in our world, we need to live with tension. We need this rubber band to be our metaphor today. A rubber band doesn't serve its purposes if one side is not pulling against the other. And some of you are about to lose heart, or some of you are very confused, and the darkness is overwhelming you, and you're confused about what the church should be about. I'm fired up to tell you today, the church should be about the tension between grace and truth. We hold many things in tension. But we're called, as John said, the one who raced to the tomb, who when he was an old man would later say, Jesus came. The Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld its grace and its full glory, full of grace and truth, not partial in any endeavor, not a little bit of grace, not a scarcity of truth, but in full measure, Jesus displayed to us grace and truth. So we need to walk in this world with this. If we only give people grace, what are we doing? This may be too abrupt for some of you, but we're not loving people if we only give them grace. Because sin and evil resides in every heart. And sin and evil will continue to fracture hearts and our world if we don't call each other out on it and point each other to a Savior. And by the way, I see so many of you living with so much guilt. And Jesus says, I can wash that away. And that is grace. But if you only give grace, you're letting people live in their sin. There's an ism for that. There's all kind of isms. There's an ism for that. If the church only preaches grace, it's called universalism. And universalism is, hey, it's okay, you do you follow your heart, and you live your truth. It'll all be okay because we're all getting there. Listen, Jesus died on the cross for our sin. He died a violent death. Listen, we need truth with grace. But if we only preach truth, and this is where religious people really get it wrong, I feel like universalism is predominant in our day, but legalism is when it's all truth and no grace. We fall into this trap of legalism, but we need to learn to live with this tension. So let's say that you're driving early one morning and it's still dark. The sun hasn't fully shone. Your car breaks down. And I'm looking at my friend Brian Cullen back there. We had a team in South Africa and in Lesotho, and the car broke down, and he's a mechanic, and he fixed it real quick. That wouldn't have happened if I was there. But Brian to the rescue. But let's say you're pretty good like Brian. Your car breaks down. It's dark. You get out, and you look under the hood. You got a flashlight. You got a wrench. With the flashlight, it'll show you what's wrong. But it's with the wrench that you fix it. And grace is this, or truth rather, is this flashlight that says, here is what's wrong. And the wrench is the grace to say, here's the healing, here's the help. And that's what the church needs to be about, the grace and the truth of understanding that the truth of God is not in us, that we lie and we deceive and we hurt and our sin is getting the best of us, but we have a Savior. And so we deal with our sin ruthlessly, but we love graciously and receive the grace and forgiveness that God has for us. As Lauren and the team make their way up, I want to close as we think about Jesus being relational and responsive and relentless. I want to show you a picture of an RJ, Robert Jermaine Thomas. And if you're a note taker, learn about this guy. I'll tell you something cool. He was, in the late 1800s, he was a missionary to China. So he was bringing the gospel to the people of China, and God was doing a great work. By the way, there's a church in China, and can I tell you, it's booming. And back in that day, in the late 1800s, he became aware that there's this whole country called Korea that they didn't have Bibles, they didn't know the gospel. So he looks at some women and men in his group, and he says, relentlessly, he says, let's translate the Bible into Korean. Robert Jermaine Thomas and his crew, that's a Herculean task. They translate the Bible into Korean, and he goes across the border with these Bibles. You're talking about risking his life. The second trip in, they killed him. 27 years old. Any 27-year-olds in the house? He was 27 years old, and they took his life. But he had already gotten some Bibles to people. He got it to a particular high-ranking government official who was inviting people in, had to be very careful. He was inviting them in, friends and family, into his house, and they would post the Bible in closets and secret places around the room and such. And people would come in and read, and it went from this house to that house and that house to that house. And sociologists tell us, historians and sociologists tell us, that there's probably never been a nation as Christian as South Korea. They send more missionaries to the world than we send out as Americans. Y'all know that? And this guy that you may have never heard of, just quietly was relentless. Why? Because Jesus is. Would you stand with me, church? And I want to ask you, in light of what you've heard today, the incarnation and the crucifixion and the resurrection, can I tell you, you're like me. We weren't there. We weren't there, but we're here. And we're here because of what happened there. And my hope and prayer is that God would stir us up. Church, what I'm asking you today is to say, I'm all in. To say that I'm all in, and that our leaders here, the pastors and teachers that equip, would know that you're in. We wouldn't be worried about you or wondering about you. We would know that you're in because we see you. We're able to know that this is your place. Jesus is relational. We're asking you to be. Jesus was responsive. Let's go to needs. Let's love one another. Let's bear one another's burdens. You know why we gather on Sunday? I was sitting here last night in tears. Just like this burst of insight came to me. That we gather on Sundays. Man, because the day-to-day darkness is really too much. And parents, look at me. It's getting y'all. It's getting you. Well, I think we got through it somehow. We got some marvelous young adults who love the Lord. But man, there's some parents, man, it is overwhelming you. The day-to-day darkness, it's too much. So we gather and we sing, and we're just looking at each other saying, hey, you're not in this alone. You're not in this alone. And I tell stories like that, man, to fire you up and to fire me up. And this nominalism, man, I'm sick of it. Is that what you want? I better stop. I didn't talk this way at the 9:30. Father, bless our songs and this worship. In Jesus, amen.